Hello, welcome to this video tutorial. My name is Mrs. Cook. I'm an A-level sociology teacher and examiner for AQA. So today I thought I would share with you a past student's answer for the 20 marker on paper 3, which is a theory or method question. Now I like to teach this as a theory, debate or method question because the question tends to either be on how do we understand society, and they give you a theory, or it might be focused on a method, or as in today's case, it could be one of those debate style questions. So let's have a look at this question. Apply material from the item and your knowledge. Evaluate the extent to which sociology can be regarded as scientific. So it is a debate question asking you to go through the perspectives which debate as to whether sociology can be a science. The item there is for your safety net, and it will help guide you to what to talk about. So there's a little section on positivists, and then there is a small section at the end which guides you to encourage evaluation. So the question's asking you to evaluate, can sociology be a science? Can it be regarded as scientific? So you can't just put forward the perspectives that it is, you've got to evaluate throughout. So I'm going to share with you in minutes an ideal 20 out of 20 answer. Now, before we get on with the actual answer itself, let's just have a look at what we're aiming for. So when you look at this student's answer, you will see evidence of this throughout. This is the top band of the mark scheme. So let's have a look at the criteria. So I've highlighted the AO1. They are asking for sound, conceptually detailed knowledge, a range of relevant material, a sophisticated understanding. So what does that mean? Well, we are looking to see relevant theories, how detailed the answer is in explaining the how and the why. We're looking at whether studies are included, sociological evidence, concepts, that special language that you've been learning over 2 years. Are you getting all those concepts and key terms in? Application, AO2, that you apply the material accurately. So in terms of what is application, do you apply examples of what you're saying? So you put forward a point, but do you explain it using an actual piece of evidence? And AO3 means two things. It means analysis and it means evaluation. Now, analysis is basically how detailed, how many chains of reasoning do you use when you explain the point you're making? Do you unpack the how, the why? This means that. This leads to. This is because. Those are the sorts of sentences you'll see throughout this student's answer. And the evaluation is quite easy. It's either a criticism or a strength. But to get into the top band, you'll see I've highlighted the word explicit and relevant. So we do not want any juxtaposition evaluation. We need it to be specifically related to the point that you've just gone through. And the last thing I've highlighted is conclusions. Now, there is no mention of introduction in the top band mark scheme. However, there is appropriate conclusions mentioned. So we need to be thinking about what we're leading to in a way of an answer at the end. So let's have a look at the introduction. Now, this student has started with the definition, and that is what I usually teach my students. An introduction should be short, no more than, say, 3 sentences, and it should define any concepts or ideas that are in the question. So the question is asking you to evaluate the extent sociology can be regarded as scientific. So a good starting point is to define what a science is. What is scientific? So this student has actually used a name, Lawson, and has talked through the features of a science. It is objective. It uses objective evidence for its propositions, logical, systematic way of collecting data. In other words, it's empirical. So if we think back to that mark scheme, it said conceptually detailed, and within the first couple of sentences, this student has used the appropriate language, that specialist language related to science that they would have learned during their theory methods lessons. Now, the last sentence is what opens up the rest of the essay. The extent to whether sociology can replicate this method in understanding human behaviour is not universally agreed. So we will probably revisit that in the conclusion. So let's have a look at their very first paragraph. Now, this is a very, very chunky paragraph. And remember, you've only got 35 minutes. So this student must have pre-planned this essay. There is no way you can write really detailed paragraphs just ad hoc. So let's have a look at why this is a good paragraph to begin with. So this student has decided to start with positivism and has referred to the item immediately. Now, the good thing is, positivism is in the item that's been hinted at, and they are starting with that theory to unpack the key players in sociologists who firmly believe sociology is a science, and they've got Comte here for support. So they begin with a nice opening sentence. Positivists, like Comte, believe yes, sociology can and should be a science. What happens in the rest of the paragraph, and I've left it blank, I haven't highlighted the skills because I thought perhaps you could screenshot it and download it or print it off and do it yourself, but a really good task here is to look for the AO1, look for the AO2 and AO3. So when you read this paragraph, you will see it is absolutely bombarding the examiner with key ideas that are being unpacked. So let's just read the first little bit. For positivists, reality is not random, but patterned. There are social facts and laws which make up the rules of society, which are separate and independent of the individual. As a result, positivists believe that society can be studied in the same way as the natural world, and that patterns can be observed and analysed empirically. So they're unpacking why positivists think sociology is a science, because the human world is very similar to the natural world. What they do next, and the next part of the answer, is bring in evidence of somebody who has thought like this. So Durkheim and Durkheim's famous study of suicide is one of the best examples of a study who has a person who has taken something seemingly very personal, suicide, and showed how you can study it scientifically without values impeding into the research. So they talk through Durkheim's study, talking about how he discovered it was social laws acting independently of the individual that produces patterns in suicide rates. They link it back to the question, and then they evaluate. So they've used an explicit evaluation here. They've said that science doesn't always follow that format of empirical discovery that's logical and looking at external variables like Durkheim did. And they've given the example of Fleming's discovery of penicillin, which was a scientific discovery by accident. So it wasn't necessarily following a methodological kind of systematic, logical way of doing science. So a very good bit of explicit evaluation. And linked to humans at the end, they've said humans have agency, we have free will. So yes, positivists might want to study sociology in a scientific way, but when you compare it with the natural sciences that are dealing with things that don't have a conscience or a consciousness, we cannot transport easily those methods over to the human world, because people can think and feel different from day to day, time to time, and therefore they're not predictable. So it's no use using those structured quantitative methods. So pause the video now, have a good read of the paragraph and highlight the AO1, the AO2 and the AO3, and you'll see it's in abundance here. Paragraph 2, and what I like about this student is they have made it flow. So it's not just a separate paragraph. So they've started with another key theorist in this debate, Popper, and have linked it to the above paragraph. So Popper disagrees that scientific theories can be produced through inductive reasoning, as positivists would argue. There's a nice natural flow to the essay. They then talk through Popper's ideas, because he believes that sociology cannot at the moment be considered a science, and he talks through this idea of science being something that engages in falsification. So, science ability to make discoveries is all about its ability to falsify evidence, not prove it right, but prove it wrong, because we can never be conclusively right but we can be conclusively wrong. And Popper is basically saying that sociology deals with things that aren't open to empirical falsification. So we talk through that, or the student talks through that and gives an example in sociology of concepts that cannot be falsified. The hidden curriculum is a concept. We can't see it, we can't touch it, we can't measure it necessarily, or not easily. Anomie is another key concept used by functionalists that this student gives a sense of anomie. How can we measure and let alone disprove it from occurring? So these are theoretical ideas that are not easily operationalized. We can't turn them into something measurable. So they talk through that, they link it back to the question, and then the last part of this essay talks about criticizing Popper's idea of falsification. So a very explicit piece of evaluation at the end, linking it back to, therefore, sociology cannot be a science. Marxism, for instance, can't directly observe capitalism. However, we can still look at its effect. So falsification shouldn't necessarily be the be all and end all of whether something is scientific. We've got another paragraph on Kuhn here, and again talks about dominant paradigms and that sociology cannot at the moment be considered a science because there is no dominant paradigm in sociology. And a dominant paradigm is a dominant way of thinking that all of the people in that discipline subscribe to. So in the scientific community, we once thought that the world was flat. Nobody questioned it until eventually, over time, evidence built up that questioned this idea, and we had a scientific revolution. So what Kuhn is telling us is that in sociology, we simply do not have any dominant theory that overrides any other. We have Marxists who think that society is characterized by capitalism and explains human behavior and patterns in human behavior. You have feminists who say, well, actually, it's more to do with patriarchy. So we have competing paradigms, no dominant paradigm, no unity. So this paragraph successfully uses that argument to answer the question that no, sociology can't really be regarded as scientific. And they get in examples from sociology as well, and they evaluate with postmodernists this idea that even if you wanted to have a dominant paradigm in today's society, we are going away from this one way of thinking, this dominant meta-narrative, and it's irrelevant. So it's a really good explicit evaluation right at the end. So again, what I would encourage you guys to do is pause the video, screenshot it, highlight the AO1, the AO2, the AO3, what I call the TESCO, the theory, the concepts, the studies, the how and the why for the analysis, just to understand why this particular paragraph is strong. And last but not least, we have the paragraph on interpretivists. So they are the complete opposite to positivists. Again, the student looks at Mead and Blummer, and there's also links to Weber with Versten in this paragraph. And again, follows that Peel paragraph structure, makes the point that sociology cannot be a science because we as humans have agency and we have a conscience, a consciousness. So talking about meanings behind actions, that there are no patterns in our actions, and this student provides a really good how and why section. That E section is nice and chunky, and the link back is keeping the answer focused. They've brought in examples of feminists who argue that, if anything, it's not desirable not to be putting your values in. You know, we should be putting our values in. We should be, you know, given a voice to the people that we're researching, namely women in that case. So to be scientific and be objective is not desirable. Subjectivity is desirable. And then you've got your however comment at the end, where we've got positivists that are arguing against this, and that, you know, in order to become a science, to have scientific status and to understand the human world, they are critical of the interpretivist ideas because it leads to small sample sizes, it leads to value-laden research, which is simply not scientific. Very last part, the conclusion. Here I've returned to, or the student has returned to, No universal agreement as to whether sociology is a science. We've seen that throughout the essay, because not only have we put forward a strong argument that it's not, but we've also heavily debated that at the end. So the evaluation in every paragraph has been quite chunky. And then this student brings in postmodernism once again, that would say scientific knowledge is increasingly becoming questioned. People are skeptical of it. Meta-narrative is not desirable. And instead, we should perhaps use a mixture of scientific and non-scientific or more qualitative methods to understand human behaviour. So I've tried to keep this video short and under sort of 16 minutes, because as promised, this is supposed to be a model answer in minutes. And I hope you can have time to pause, to read and to highlight, because this answer is simply fantastic, and it is one of my past students who actually went on to get an A star. So I hope that's been helpful. Remember to subscribe and like for more videos.